Doran with ABC Computers. Welcome to our presentation this morning, the cloud and what it means for your business. Today we're going to be covering a little bit of the material that we hear questions on most from our customers and the people that we're visiting with. Presenting with me today is Ben Bolte. Ben is our Director of Infrastructure Sales. Ben has over 20 years of network and infrastructure assistance and has certified with Microsoft on many of the cloud-based applications that are offered through Microsoft. So we want to make this an interactive presentation this morning, so certainly if you have questions, if you use the raise your hand function and submit those, I will try to field questions as they come up and see to it that we try to make this as informative as possible. So Ben, will you switch the slide for me? And so just a little background, we've got some folks that know ABC well and some that don't know us as well. So ABC's been in business for 30 years. We have 3 offices in Wisconsin. We have an office in South Bend, Indiana, and we have staff located really throughout the Midwest. So we have 43 people on the team and really have a diverse skill set to try to help companies with their IT strategy. Next slide, Ben. We work with a variety of different companies. Many firms will specialize in one industry. ABC has really developed a track record and a reputation for helping companies solve complex issues with their IT systems. And so some of these folks you might recognize: Chef's Ice Cream, Lids, they're the hat guys in the stores. If you're a fisherman, the Mr. Twister brand of lures is popular, or for bicyclists, that you might recognize the Ceres cycling rack on the back of that car. But the concept here is that we help a variety of firms achieve their strategic objectives with IT systems, and many of these companies have worked with ABC for well over 10 years, and we have quite a few references that will tell you that they've saved well into the many hundreds of thousands of dollars through strategies that we developed with them and helped them execute. Next slide, Ben. So really, where this all starts and what happens a lot is the question, what is the cloud? And we hear people talk a lot about the cloud, and they speak in almost this mystical kind of way in the commercials that you see, in the presentations that you see, in newspaper ads. They make it sound like it's magic. It's not magic. It's in its most simple terms, the cloud basically means that the servers are located somewhere other than in your building. And so Ben is going to walk us through a few examples that should help you better understand really what the cloud is, how it relates to the networks that you have in place today, and how the cloud might play a role in your future IT strategy. So we'll switch the slides, and Ben, I'll turn it over to you for a minute.
All right, sounds good. So, I'll start at the beginning. Most people had a traditional network configuration where you had a client machine that was connecting to a database or server, and it was a simple setup. I hear clients tell me all the time it used to be simple. It all started when they needed just a single application that a couple people connected to. They didn't have to worry about security concerns. They didn't have to worry about the internet. But as times progress, the number of users starts growing, then a second application gets introduced, and somewhere along the lines you end up with a configuration that looks more like this. People start bringing in mobile devices. The client machines start expanding. There's more of them. Tablets get introduced. People want to connect from the road, and all these type of things, and you realize that your little network has become a mission-critical piece of your operation. a half a dozen or more applications that your company depends on to function every day, and you start realizing the updates become more involved and more difficult due to the dependence upon all these moving parts. And at some point, the internet connection was introduced, and now security starts playing a role. You hear about companies like Target and others that have security breaches, and you start getting worried about, where's my data? Is it safe? Does everyone have access to it? All those things start to become reality. And then what usually happens is you end up with a second or third location. You start getting remote staff, and the next thing you know, you have something that looks like this. And, you know, I have customers ask me all the time, like, you know, this is the point where it's gotten overwhelming. I didn't this isn't my specialty. You know, I'm a CFO or an office administrator, these type of roles, and they don't have an IT background, and they're trying to manage something like this. And that's, you know, we ask, like, when did you decide to get into the business? You know, at ABC, we believe it takes time to focus on all the things that are involved in this. And, you know, you want to focus on growing your business, building profits, developing a loyal client base. And at ABC, we're in the IT business. We spend 24/7 working on this type of stuff. So the questions that I get asked about, you know, what is the cloud and what's it mean for my business? And as all this stuff has evolved, our dependence on technology has increased. And the cloud has been brought up, and everyone acts like it's a completely new concept and revolutionary. So looking back, you know, what really is cloud computing? Well, as Tom referred to it, it's really not anything special or new. It's just your data sitting in a different location. It's a common used term, and it's kind of like, I look at it as more of like a metaphor for the internet. You know, marketers have seen to popularize the phrase in the cloud, where it refers to either a software, a platform, or infrastructure that's typically sold as a service remotely through the internet. Typically, the seller has a physical server that hosts products and services from a remote data center, so end users don't have to handle that piece. They simply log onto the network without installing anything, or they can run a light client to get the application. There's lots of major players in this area, and I'm sure some of you've heard of, you know, Google, Amazon, Salesforce, Office 365. These are all common cloud-based applications and services. The things are kind of broke down into three major models from a computing perspective. There's a software as a service, a platform as a service, and an infrastructure as a service. And we'll kind of go into a little bit of detail about what the differences are and how it's been broke out. So, oops, gotta go back here, slide. So we hear all the time that, you know, this sounds like a new concept or whatever, and, you know, it's interesting. It's not new at all. It's actually been around since the early 50s, when computers were only available for large corporations and universities. For some of you that have been around a long time in the business world, you might have heard of IBM's Service Bureau Corporation back in the 60s, where they rented computer spaces off of mainframes. In the 70s and 80s, you know, these companies really thrived as more small business recognized the needs for the computer services. And somewhere in the late 80s and 90s, desktop computers became more of the day-to-day environment in the business world. And with the more computing power locally, we could run more applications that way. So, you know, that's where the word processing and some of these other applications started to come into play in the day-to-day environment. And then in the mid to late 90s, you know, telephone companies started realizing that they could provide virtual private networks, or VPNs, which allowed the small companies to be able to connect multiple locations together without having the expensive point-to-point networks like we had in the past. So this allowed us to start sharing data between locations. And what slowly started as just a single office running an application started to roll up into multiple companies, or multiple locations running a single database with users all over the place. In the dot-com bubble stages, so to speak, Microsoft and Amazon started playing a development role, and they realized they had these big data centers sitting there, and only about 10% of the capacity was ever being used at one time, but they had a plan for the occasional spikes. You know, for Amazon with their stores, the Black Friday type of things, the Christmas holidays, they had a bill for the max capacity of users, but the rest of the year the stuff sat there. And you know, at ABC, we've been working with companies for 30+ years. We're always trying to build an environment for that worst case scenario instead of the day-to-day. So what they realized is they had all this extra space and capacity that used most of the time, and they're trying to figure out how do we start separating some of that stuff. You know, it's not a whole lot different a concept of a manufacturing company. If you would run a second or third shift, you can get more done with the same initial investment. So they started looking at how they could do some of the stuff, and you know, free services started popping up all over, like Hotmail, Gmail, and all these different products. And what it was basically is designed initially as a test bed for how do we provide service to a large number of people with the stuff that's sitting there at idle, for lack of a better way of putting it. So along the way, they realized that if they could start separating some of this computing load from a physical system and separate it so that people could isolate their stuff, that they could actually start selling some of this off. And that's where the whole concept of the virtual server started to play into this. And it really accomplished two big pieces. It allowed us to separate the operating system from the hardware, and from a data and security perspective, it was now separated to share the physical resources, yet maintain the security that we all want for our business. So if you look at it from a high-level perspective, your traditional on-premise environment has three base pieces. You have a storage piece, you have a networking piece that ties it together, and you have the compute section, which is the actual servers themselves. The other piece of it, so to speak, is you have the operating system, the actual runtime of the applications themselves, and the data. So they kind of broke it out into 7 layers is what we've traditionally had for our private on-site setup. And if you look at Microsoft literature, they refer to this as the private cloud. At some point, you know, in the last 10 years or so, they've added what I call the 8th layer, which is the virtual machine layer, which separates the physical components, which is the bottom 3, from the software components, which is the top 4 in my drawing here. And that started to add an extra layer here to separate those. So what they did from a cloud perspective is they've taken those same layers and they've broke them out into different models. So when you're looking at different cloud options and you're hearing about them, you're going to hear about 3 common types of offerings. Typically, there's going to be infrastructure as a service, there will be platform as a service, and there's software as a service. So in the infrastructure as a service piece, the bottom 3 pieces, your computing, your networking, and your storage, are all managed by a vendor. The top 4 or 5 pieces get managed from your perspective, whether it's your IT staff or a partner works on that piece. So your physical switching, all the storage, and the physical server components are completely managed, the pieces in the black. On the platform as a service, it's broke out so you're just managing the actual data and the application, and everything else is managed by a vendor. Typical applications for this, if you'd see like Dynamics CRM that Microsoft offers, where you actually have ability to modify some of the application stuff, and you also manage all the access and data pieces of it. The last piece is software as a service, and this is the most common that you see currently. These are the applications like Office 365, Salesforce.com, and those type of options where you have access to your data and you control access from a user perspective, but everything else is managed by the vendor, whether it's Microsoft, Amazon, or whoever the hosting partner is. And on the bottom, you can kind of see that from left to right, you have the hosted environment, which you have the most control in. The development layer is what I call it, where you have development access, but you really can't control it. That would be stuff like Rackspace for websites, Microsoft Azure for website type hosting, like I said before, Dynamics CRM, those type of applications. And then all the way on the right, you have the consume model, where you just get access to your data and the application, and you run it on a day-to-day basis. And back to you, Tom.
So then really the question becomes, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. So, as we think about the question from earlier, when did you decide to get in the IT business? When you begin to look at the complicated setups and, frankly, look around your office. We like the IT team, okay, and they're nice enough people, but, the fact is that we now have significant investments in equipment, in personnel, and in other, utilities, and these are all areas that distract us from our core business. As Ben alluded to, you got into the business to sell a product or a service, and so you want to spend your time and your resources working with your customers or with your development group, trying to improve your products and expand your services. And so, today, what we think we see is that the right answer for most businesses is probably a little bit of both. I would be pretty willing to bet today that the computer network that you have looks a lot like the case that Ben mentioned for Amazon and Microsoft and others. Most of the time, it's hardly getting used. And for the past 30 years, we've been helping customers try to plan their networks. And there's been one common strategy over time. Every company needs their network to be ready for peak load capacity. When do users in your businesses start screaming? They start screaming when the network slows down, when they can't get into an application, when they believe they're trying to do work and the system is not ready to support them. And so when we go through the process and we start the conversation, it's a pretty standard approach. We look back at our past history. We try to guess appropriately for, what's our future growth going to be for the next 3 to 5 years. And, if we're all honest on this call, and, you don't have to raise your hands, but I can see your names. I know who you are. You're thinking my server needs to last longer than 3 to 5 years. So you think about that crystal ball you're looking at, and we're trying to build a network that's going to handle the workload that we think we're going to throw at it. And we have to build it for the worst case, or we're not going to be ready when our peak loads, when customers call to try to orders, when manufacturing tries to run MRP, when we're really having what we're all hoping for, right? We're all trying to grow our business. And so a lot of people want to do business with us, usually in spurts. And so there's a lot of reasons why this doesn't make a lot of sense. From an upfront cost perspective, you're going to have to invest a lot more in hardware and network capabilities. The ongoing costs are significant. Utilities are higher, staff to keep it going, the general maintenance and upkeep that you need to invest with, outside firms like ABC. And so with the cloud options that are now available, we can actually build an environment for your current needs and scale it up or down as it is appropriate for your workload at any given moment. We can scale dynamically for some companies during the course of a day or a week. And so you get maximum resources when you need them and fewer resources when you don't. And at the end of the day, you want to pay for only what you need. So, Ben, let's switch slides, please. So, what's this mean for your business? And essentially, what it means is a couple of things. And if you hit the next slide, Ben, please. First and foremost, you pay for only what you use. So with solutions like Office 365 or Microsoft Azure or any other data center or hosting service, you're paying for what you need now rather than putting out money now for things you may or may not need for 3 or 5 years. And you get so much more. This topic's been getting kicked around for probably 2 or 3 years in earnest. And customers have asked questions, and we have a lot of conversation. And until fairly recently, the response we would get back is, "Ooh, that all sounds interesting, but that's expensive." And so, as with many technologies, the price is coming down rapidly. But why was it expensive? And the fact is that you were getting and would get today so much more than you would normally be able to afford as a regular business. As Ben mentioned in the very early slides, originally these types of networks, they were only available for universities and governments and really large institutions. And the reason for that is they were scalable. And so now today you can get a scalable network for very little, under $100 a month. You get geo-redundancy. It took me a week to learn how to pronounce that, but it's a fancy word that means that your backups and your failovers are in multiple geographic areas. I know that many folks on this call have lived through the experience of installing their backup tape only to find out the tape was no good. And the idea that we would take the tape off site, maybe if we remember, and we keep it at the house. Geo-redundancy means that there are failovers among these data centers that are geographically diverse, sometimes across North America, sometimes even more broadly than that if that's what you want. And what that provides for your business is the fact that, in the event of a natural disaster, you could still be up and running with your network, provided somebody had an internet connection. You get security. So far more, a lot more advanced security options. And, Ben and I were in a conversation not that long ago, and one of the customers said to us, I'm really uncomfortable with my data being somewhere else. The fact is that most customers are not actually targeted. But if I were targeting your business and maybe I wanted to know your secret ingredients for your particular product, where would I go look for it? And the truth of the matter is the first place I'm probably going to look is in your building. And so when I move my data off-site, I have not only taken the fairly small statistical risk that somebody's actually looking for your data, and I have increased my odds against discovery because my data is not in my business anymore. It is remote, and it is highly unlikely that anybody's going to know where it is. So now, not only do they have to find out where it is, then they have to go through all the things that they would have to go through if they were to get into your network. The next piece in a cloud type arrangement is that your applications are up to date all the time. So the updates that go out for Office applications or your network or your database applications can be installed dynamically, and more importantly, and this is a really key advantage, everyone's on the same version all the time. So we don't have some computers that are running XP and some people that are running Vista and somebody else that's running Windows 7 and somebody else that's got Windows 8. Nobody knows how to work on Windows 8 if they haven't seen it yet. And so, you know, that hurts efficiency. It increases our learning curve, and it makes it more difficult to share data within our organizations. Another great tool that for dispersed teams for sure are the collaboration tools. So, you know, applications used to be very single-threaded. If I had the Word document open for the quote, then Abby across the office couldn't open the same Word document. And now today, with newer technologies and a cloud environment, you could actually both open the document. You could even share it on a screen and simultaneously edit that document. So if you had a conference call with your sales director who was in California and your manufacturing people who were in Virginia and the executive office that might be somewhere else, and everybody was looking at a plan together, they could all be editing the document simultaneously. Collaboration doesn't get any deeper than that. And that's only new, certainly for mid-sized companies, that's new in the very recent history. And then the other thing that Microsoft has done in particular is you've got a vendor who will put their money where their mouth is with a financially backed service level agreement. And, you know, that simply means that if you're down, they are going to monetarily make that right for you because they're so confident that they can give you high reliability. And what that all allows you to do is to get back to running the business you're in rather than the IT business you've created. Staff, time, utilities, move capital expense, and all of that creates a peace of mind, especially for the executive group. So, Ben, will you switch to the next slide, please? So, you know, where do you start? And that really is what becomes an overwhelming decision for a lot of folks. But it doesn't have to be complicated. It really all starts with a discussion. One size doesn't fit all. It is probably not all cloud or all on-premise. There is probably a middle ground that's going to make sense for most customers. But we need to have an honest conversation about what is the strategic vision for your company, and not as it relates to IT. Where are you trying to go? Which customers do you serve today, and how do you want to serve them in the future? And then let's go look at our IT infrastructure and think about how does it support that vision. And that is just a conversation around a table with your IT provider. We develop a strategy on how to best construct a network to support your business. And then we execute the plan. And maybe that's something you can do internally. Maybe that's something you rely on your IT partner to do. But, you know, once we begin that execution, the conversation is really only just started. From there, we should have a regular cadence of communication where we're talking, we're discussing future plans, because whether your IT partner is ABC or someone else, the fact is if we only call them after we've already made the decision internally, they're at a big disadvantage. That we can offer better advice if we have the context and we're involved in your thought process, so that as those plans come to fruition, we've known about them all along, and as a team, we've had some contingencies laid out so that when it comes time to tweak our infrastructure, we're ready to do it. And then, you know, the worst possible case is that you only call your IT partner when you have a crisis. And, there's no time for strategy when you're down. The only strategy when you're down is how do we get these servers back up and how much money is it going to cost? And you usually don't even ask about the money until after you're up. And that's just not the way you want to try to make decisions. Those are decisions they're made on emotion. We're reacting to a problem instead of really being a proactive team and planning for how do we make sure that we don't get in that situation to begin with. Ben, next slide. So, if you have an IT partner, get them on the phone. Talk to them about some of these things. Ask some questions. It really is a conversation that's probably going to take a little while to map out the best plan for you. If you don't have an IT partner, ABC would be happy to give you a free consultation. And for those folks that are really considering this type of a solution, and for some of the folks on the call, I know we've actually had some conversations. We've got a special offer. We worked with Microsoft, and they've given us some things that we can pass along to you. And so for folks that are really thinking about some cloud deployment, or you want to test something out, for the first 30 days, it's absolutely free. And for the first 6 months, it'll be 60% off. So anyone who contacts us before the end of the month will qualify. So we have to enter your name with Microsoft so that we know that we've got the opportunity registered. But from there, they will give us a protected price. So we've got the 30 days free, and we've got 6 months at a very substantial discount. So if you're considering a move to the cloud, or you want to understand more about what cloud applications could mean for your business, there's probably no better time than to start a conversation than now. So now I'm going to open it up for some questions. Ben, did I miss anything you think we should touch on before I open it up to questions?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. So couple of questions here. So Jeannie asks, this is long. So Jeannie, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna there's an awful lot here. She's got some details. Jeannie, I'm gonna pass these to Ben, and he will follow up with you with a meeting, just like we were talking about. So I will send all this information to Ben, and you should hear from him shortly. Other questions from anyone? So I have a question here, Ben, about how long does it take to deploy a cloud application?
That's a great question, not an easy one to answer. So depending upon the application, I mean, literally it could be as much as or as little as an hour or two, or it might take a long time. I mean, there's a lot that goes into figuring out is it a new application, are you migrating from an existing application? An example of something that we do on a weekly basis here is we do a lot of Exchange migrations where people have on-premise Exchange servers where they're moving to an Office 365 hosted Exchange environment. In those situations, we have a tool that we put in that goes and will actually migrate your mail up to the Exchange server in Microsoft's cloud. That usually takes a week or so to do a sync process because we don't want to, for lack of better terms, hog all your bandwidth while that synchronization is taking place. But from a downtime perspective, it's usually about 10 or 15 minutes while the client configuration changes, and that's all automatic with the tool. There's a DNS replication piece, obviously, that has to take place so that when people are emailing you, their DNS record has to point to the new location. And we have some tricks to get that minimized as much as possible, but in some cases, your email might be delayed on the receiving side, as much as 24 or 48 hours. We typically do that over a weekend, so it hurts less. But I guess if you have specific examples or whatever, we could go into that. and we'd be more than happy to sit down and talk through that.
Thanks, Ben. Couple more questions. So what type of bandwidth do we need? We've got one of the folks on the call that lives in a small town, and the internet provider doesn't seem to offer a lot of bandwidth.
It all depends on the application you're trying to run, or applications. There's some times that you can get away with connections as low as 2 or 3 meg without a problem. At ABC, we use most of our services are hosted currently. I travel a lot in the winter and have a 4G access point that I use, and I use our phone system, which is hosted completely through that along with everything else, and that's just on a 3 or 4G connection. So I mean, it can be pretty small. Depending on what you're trying to do, it could be pretty large, but in most cases, we find that a 5 or 10 meg connection is enough for most small businesses.
And that's a test we could do, right? With a short meeting, we could come in and
absolutely
give better advice.
Yep.
Good. Really a follow-on to something you just alluded to, but Scott is asking, are telephone cloud services stable enough these days?
I would say absolutely. At ABC, we've been on one for, I believe, 3 years. Maybe Tom can remember the date better than I can. But we actually have a handful of clients that are on a hosted link system like ourselves, and everybody's pretty happy with it. The nice part, obviously, is if you have people that are remote or sales staff like ourselves that are out of the office a lot, you have all the normal functions that you would sitting at the office, and pieces like video conferencing, instant messaging, and some of that collaboration type stuff with whiteboards and OneNote documentation you want to a traditional PBX. And honestly, the cost of these type of solutions have gotten down to the point that it's usually cheaper than what a phone line costs for an individual.
Good. Another follow-up, do you still need fiber or QoS for phone, or does a current copper service work okay?
Depending on the number of users, I would say typically for most of us in the small to medium business range, regular copper is just fine. We do normally set up a QoS service on your router to prioritize traffic in case someone's doing large downloads or streaming or something, but traditional copper is usually fine.
Another question, Ben. Really great questions, guys. Keep these coming. This is good conversation. So another question is, if we want to control the updates to our applications, are we able to? I may not want to have everything updated to the most current version for some reason, and can we control that if it's in the cloud?
That's a really good question. So going back to my slide deck for a second, if you recall where we talk about the 3 different levels between infrastructure as a service all the way to software as a service. If you're in a software as a service platform, like an Office 365, for example, you really don't have a whole lot of control. You can delay the update sometimes, but you're going to get updated whether you like it or not at some point. In an infrastructure as a service model where you have more control and you're not sharing the servers that you're on, you're in a virtual server environment or a private server environment. In those environments, if you want to install an old application or want to run on an older version, you can do that for as long as you want, typically speaking. The only caveat is that you usually have to be on a supported operating system. So if you're in Azure, it would be 2008 or newer. And some of the third-party ones like Amazon stuff are allowing 2003 yet, but those will all be going away in July of 2015 as support gets dropped for Server 2003.
Thanks, Ben. So another question. So I'd like to talk to my owner about this. Can you help us with an ROI presentation?
Absolutely. We've done a lot of them for different clients, And typically speaking, in most scenarios, if you do a 3 to 5 year replacement cycle on your hardware, or you planned for that, it will end up almost being a wash, if not cheaper, going to a cloud-based application. And you get all the greater advantages of things like Tom was mentioning, the scalability, the redundancy, and all those type of things that most people traditionally don't buy. So there's a lot of huge advantages.
Other questions, gang? This one might be a little tough, Ben, but we've got 20 users on our network. Can you give us an idea as to how much something like this might cost?
All right, so if you wanted a wild ballpark, and this is totally unqualified because I don't know what you're running from an application standpoint or whatever, but I typically tell customers you're going to be looking at, for a full infrastructure as a service model where everything is out of your premise, you're generally looking at anywhere from about $50 to $150 per user per month. It's just a wild ballpark, and if you want to sit down and go through the details and figure out what your exact model would be, we're more than happy to help you do that. And there's a great offer to get a trial set up too on some of that stuff. So.
Good. Okay, looks like, and so last call on questions. Any other questions for Ben or me? All right.
And I'll just throw it out there, Tom. If somebody has questions afterward, they can certainly follow up later, because I know how often people get hung up off a call and think, well, I should have asked that. So we're here for you if you got more questions.
Perfect. Well, Ben, thanks very much. Thanks to everyone for attending. Hopefully this was informative, and we look forward to talking with you soon. Have a great rest of your day.